Okay, so this is going to be a really brief rundown on Christian churches. So you might wonder, hey man, why are we looking at the Pantheon? It's a pagan monument. That's true, but it was also used as a church for a while after the establishment of Christianity, and before it was converted into just a tourist attraction. And that's because that really round rotunda, well, of course it's round, it's a rotunda, can accommodate a lot of people there for worship, and that godly light filtering in through the oculus doesn't hurt any. But the Pantheon was one of the main influences on church architecture in the earlier part in the Christian period and the Middle Ages, along with, and there was originally supposed to be another image for this, along with Trajan's Forum, or at least a particular element of Trajan's Forum, and that is the Basilica. So, the earliest Christian artwork that we have in the syllabus is the Catacombs of Priscilla. And you'll remember that the catacombs are underground in part because Christianity was still not granted a kind of imperial or legal favor, and so a lot of worship took place literally underground or on the old down low. So you'll notice that the catacombs, they're elaborately decorated as far as they can be, being underground chambers, but you have a lot of these early medallions and things like that, early iconographic representation of various scenes from the Gospels. So catacombs, not exactly a church, but I figured I'd throw that in there. And then the first of the actual churches we have is number 49, Santa Sabina, which is in Rome, and it sort of sticks out in its way because it's one of the few buildings in Rome that I think you could say is just kind of ugly on the outside, but hey, whatever. There you go. It's a basilica, so it's this sort of long, longitudinal, central axis design. And that's really the influence of, it's not just the influence of Trajan's Forum. There were other basilicas. Oh, hey, there's that other image. But, you'll note that it's a longitudinal plan. It's pretty open space in the center. There's two tiers. You get effectively that same effect with the Basilica of Santa Sabina. Processional axis down there to the end of the church. Okay, and then of course it still incorporates, I mean, this is late antiquity, the early part of the 5th century. It still incorporates some of these spolia or classical things that were just repurposed to serve a Christian aim. For something totally different, you can look at San Vitale in Ravenna. This is also in Italy, but it's a totally different style of architecture. You can see as you walk in that the floor plan is totally different. And here it is. San Vitale was organized in this octagonal way, and effectively it's totally the opposite of Santa Sabina, right? Santa Sabina, longitudinal procession. San Vitale has an ambulatory that wraps around the building. So as you were walking through, right, you'd be walking in, I don't want to say an octagon, you'd be walking in basically a circle, unless you manage to turn directly at those pinch points. Some of the key points to note about San Vitale are the octagonal design. This is something that is sort of unique among churches of the time. The exedrae, these are these little projections or semi-domes that stick out from the main center of the church and sort of incorporate the central area with the ambulatory that surrounds it. And then I already talked to you about the ambulatory. So yeah, San Vitale, totally different, and its decoration is different as well, because you'll see that something like Santa Sabina, it has some kind of light ornamentation, and then you can see that there is a fresco painted in the half dome down there at the end. But for the most part, it's largely unornamented. In the catacombs, you have frescoes painted on the walls, but in true Byzantine style, San Vitale is decorated with these rich Byzantine mosaics. There is the Emperor Justinian on the left, and then his famous wife Theodora there on the right. And so, yeah, Byzantine tradition, They go in for mosaics. Remember that a part of this has to do with that hesitancy among Greek Christians to carve graven images, and they take that graven part seriously. It's thought that by tiling images in mosaic, right, there's kind of a workaround. It's just one of their specialties, the mosaic. Actually, this comes full circle because in the early part of the Italian Renaissance, a lot of the style developed by Byzantine mosaicists ends up being the primary influence on early Renaissance Italian fresco painting. Okay. Speaking of the Byzantines, here's Hagia Sophia. You'll note that this is now a mosque, as indicated by the minarets around the complex. But it shares a certain architectural feature with the Pantheon, which is that colossal dome up there. So Justinian also commissioned this church, and a part of the reason that everybody admires this is because that dome is absolutely colossal and required the intercession of mathematicians to make it and to make it earthquake proof. Sorry, I don't know whether you guys hear dogs barking in the background, but I can, and it's extremely distracting. Uh, Hopefully, you guys aren't as distracted. All right, enough of the crap. So, Hagia Sophia, it doesn't just feature this central dome, but also these half domes here, and you can see that reflected in the floor plan. Sort of like a central dome that's really dominant, and then some half domes that really open up the space. So this accommodates a lot of people in the central area. So this was definitely the main center of worship in Constantinople at the time. And of course, when the Turks took over Constantinople and turned it into Istanbul, they weren't about to destroy this monument, they just converted it to a mosque. Okay, now jump ahead several centuries here to the 11th to the early 12th. If you guys are in English 4 and read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, you'll remember that in the very beginning of that poem, he says that, in April, people begin to long to go on pilgrimages because the weather is so nice. Going on pilgrimages was a big deal in the 11th and 12th centuries, at least among the Christians of Europe, who thought, well, my town sucks, let me get out of here and go see some holy relics. So holy relics were, to be found everywhere, apparently. I think I've made the joke to you guys before that there were enough splinters or pieces of the true cross to fill up a whole forest. Everybody had holy relics in their churches of one sort or another. So the Church of Sainte Foy had relics of Sainte Foy, and they're stored there in that reliquary that you see on the right. So that was the central attraction. So the churches in the 11th century were done up in what was called the Romanesque style, and you can see some of that here. It's kind of a prelude to the Gothic. There is a tendency to build them a little farther upward with a really dominant central axis, and then if I can move to the floor plan, you see that they begin to develop aisles on the sides. So it takes some of this inspiration from the basic basilica plan and then cuts the plan not in half, but it does bisect it with this thing called the transept. And remember, this plan is called cruciform because it takes the form of the cross. So there are aisles here under arcades, right? That is these spots set off by the columns. And then there's back here in the back of the church in the apse, there's an ambulatory so that you can walk around and see the relics in these little radiating chapels without disturbing the central activity of the church up here. Okay, so that's the Romanesque style. These Romanesque pilgrimage churches were designed to accommodate the needs of their regular attendees, I guess you could call them, as well as the needs of pilgrims who'd want to go and take a look at the relics. The outside of Sainte-Foy is important in and of itself. Remember, this architectural feature is called a tympanum. It's that sort of semicircular design over the doors. And remember, this reflects the Last Judgment. So clear clear vertical break here between the punishments of the damned on the right and then the rewards of the blessed on the left. So as you enter the church, you see Jesus there signaling with his hands outstretched. Two different possibilities for you, either salvation or damnation. So maybe it helps focus the mind on whatever is being said when you get in there. Whoops, I didn't put a number or anything like that on this, but whatever. It's Chartres Cathedral, or Our Lady of Notre Dame. Let's see. This is done up in the Gothic style. This is sort of apparent over there on the left. You can see that Gothic style sometimes didn't involve perfect symmetry along the central axis. And so that's why you've got these two different towers, which are totally different. The Gothic tends toward the pretty ornate. Some of the features, right, are the stained glass windows. You've got pointed arches. Occasionally you'll see that some of these windows are a little bit more rounded at the top, and that reflects sort of the lingering influence of the Romanesque. If you look at the central photo here, you can see some of the features of the Gothic, like this ribbed vaulting up here, and you can see that there is a tendency to be stretching the church upward from what you observed with the Romanesque. Right? So the Gothic doesn't exactly indicate a clear break from the Romanesque. It's just sort of an elaboration of a theme that was already developing. But some of the features of the Gothic are particular to the Gothic and not the Romanesque, right? Those specifically being the ribbed vaulting, the pointed arches, and then the narrow stained glass windows, an example of which you see there on the right. Gothic architecture, this is an early Gothic church, and so it's not a very good example of this, but Gothic architecture tends toward the skeletal, right? There's a tendency to try to open up the walls, let in light, use more and more stained glass, and really see how much you can get away with making the structure bare. Later Gothic churches then feature those flying buttresses, in part as a way of opening up the church itself. So you can see, like I said, the Gothic is in some ways just a real elaboration of the Romanesque, and you see that here with the three tympana that are featured outside of Chartres Cathedral. And so these, I'll just give you a brief description. The current scholarly consensus for this tympanum on the left is that that is Christ before he's been personified in the flesh. The central one is Christ's second coming, and then the one on the right is the life of Mary. So they're all really elaborate. You'll note that each of the columns features a saint or a holy figure popping out of it. So there's a lot going on. Again, the Gothic just tends toward elaboration and ornamentation. Here's the floor plan. Again, you have aisles that are created, these little colonnades or arcades that help define them. Remember, those are pointed arches that you'd be walking through. There's an ambulatory in the apse. There are also these little radiating chapels. And then, of course, there's a transept giving it the cruciform shape. Okay, back in Rome, people were a little bit unhappy with a certain Martin Luther and his Reformation, and so there was this thing held by the Catholic Church called the Council of Trent, where they came up with some resolutions for how to combat the Reformation. And this was called the Counter-Reformation. So a part of what the Counter-Reformation was focused on doing was trying to increase the accessibility of Catholic religion, but also make it more impressive. So a lot of the religious art that was commissioned during the Counter-Reformation is an attempt to say, hey, look, you guys don't want any of that dreary Northern Reformation crap. You want some of this, really beautiful, traditionally Catholic stuff. So Il Gesù is quite the unique facade on the outside. You can see that effectively it's broken into two levels. You have pilasters, which are column-like, but they're not actually weight-bearing columns. Those are just like column facades, and you have those on both the bottom level and the top level, and they're topped with these sort of Corinthian-inspired capitals. You'll note that each of those pilasters sits upon a little base, and there's a light stairway here leading to the main entrance of the church. There is a little miniature pediment which is framed by a kind of arch, and then up on the top, on the second level, you have again little pediments. You have these sort of scroll-like volutes spilling out to the side, and then you have a larger pediment on top. So it's kind of a unique take on certain elements of classical architecture that have just been repurposed. When you enter the church itself, it's pretty open. It's not very tall like some of those Gothic cathedrals, but it is pretty open, and the architects have maximized the use of space with a lot of really rich, elaborate ornamentation all throughout. Il Gesù is supposed to represent the triumph of Jesus. It's a Jesuit church. The Jesuits are one of these scholarly Catholic sects which spent a lot of time trying to combat the tide of the Reformation and to get out ahead of it by proselytizing in foreign lands. Anyway, so Il Gesù, right, well, it's very triumphant, right? You walk in and you're sort of bathed in this golden splendor of the church. You'll note that there's not really a transept. There's kind of an expansion there in the central area, but you don't have a real, true cruciform church. Also gone are the aisles. Instead, you just have these little miniature chapels on the side. So all the focus is on the central nave, and then whatever happens under the dome. And then, I think this is the last one, San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, or St. Carlos at the Four Fountains. This one posed kind of a unique architectural challenge because the place where it was sort of a small chunk of real estate, right? And so Borromini, the architect, had to squeeze this in on a street corner, in effect. But he maximized the space, and he also produced something totally different, which is a church done in the Baroque style to the extreme. If you look at the facade, certain elements of it are recognizably classical, right? You have classical columns topped with really elaborate Corinthian-style capitals. You have sculptures carved in relief, projecting out, and then you have two different levels of this. But what's totally unique is the way that these friezes on top just totally undulate, right? So you've got a lot of undulation and a lot of curvature, which suggests that the church is just sort of moving or undulating or sort of rhythmically swaying as you look at it. And this contrasts to the kind of unmovable solidity that they usually try to suggest with church architecture. You know, if you look at the basilica, there's no question about the basilica moving anywhere, right? It's a very stable sort of thing. But Borromini wanted to be playful here, and so he created something that looks like it's just rippling or waving around. Okay, that carries on, that kind of play of the Baroque carries on into the plan of the church itself. If you look there at the interior, the undulation continues, and the church is very centrally oriented. But unlike the central orientation of other churches, largely inspired by the Pantheon, you have not a circular dome, but an oval. Right, and then I think, whoops, I forgot to include a depiction of the dome itself, but, you know, you guys just take a look at that on your own time. It's all very impressive. So, yeah, this represents the real extreme that some of the counter-Reformation impulse could be taken to, where Borromini has incorporated a lot of the play and a lot of the more ridiculous extremes of the Baroque, probably to about as far as it can go without becoming a parody of itself. Um, Obviously, this style wasn't something that had long-lasting appeal. I mean, I think it's cool in its way, but really, it's one of those kinds of designs that can't really be repeated too many times because it looks like it's just copying and not homage or following a consistent school. Speaking of the Baroque, I should have mentioned that the ceiling fresco here in Il Gesù was added in the 17th century. That too is an example of Baroque art. So remember, it's really elaborate. There is the illusionistic quality in it, and then there's a ton of dynamism and movement. Right? If the Baroque is characterized by anything, it's that rejection of classical balance and harmony in favor of dynamism and excitement. So you see that in Baroque paintings. You also see that in architecture. Borromini says, hey, forget about solidity, forget about harmony, forget about symmetry, even though it's largely symmetrical. And instead, let's focus on making something dynamic and visually interesting.